I have lots of thoughts about D&D, and I hold a few contentious opinions about things. Hot and spicy takes that may set me on fire if I ever stepped into the realm of Reddit ever again. The biggest one is I don't like Warlock as a class. Big thing to get out of the way now, I'm not really going to be talking about the math and the equations for damage output or the like because I'm not good at math and that requires more than two numbers and I vastly prefer how something feels as opposed to what numbers are being crunched behind the scenes. I know Warlock is like the baseline for what like all of the other damage is compared to. I don't really care. I make it no secret that I'm not a min-maxer. I play home games with generous DMs, so worrying about stats is basically negligible. Not saying every stat is an 18 at level 1, but if I rolled particularly poorly, I'd be allowed to mulligan. I like to be good at whatever my class needs as quickly as possible, mostly upping my stats with ASIs so that my spell saves or to hit are as high as they can be. I preamble to get my credentials out of the way so that everyone knows where I'm coming from. I like to be optimal in my own style of play. Which is why everything about Warlock rubs me the wrong way to the point that it's the only class I haven't touched. I have Warlocks, but I've never been incentivized to play them. The gameplay. I have a couple of beefs with the Warlock in terms of its gameplay and how it is currently in 5e as of time of writing, before the 2024 update has come out officially. While not the newest critique under the sun, when we look at Warlock and its invocations and subclasses, you basically have one really good option and the rest are there, I guess, if you really wanna. While other classes do that too, Warlock feels like it's one of the most egregious. Warlock funnels the player into wanting to take Eldritch Blast because it's A, one of the best cantrips in the game, and 2, the better invocations are tied to Eldritch Blast. You have to want to actively play against type and not take the cantrip and lock yourself out of the most helpful invocations by simply not having it. What I am thankful for is that in the UA at time of writing is that Eldritch Blast invocations can apply to any cantrip that it would be applicable to. This flexibility makes the idea of playing a Warlock by itself so much more appealing. Warlock might be one of the most customizable classes, giving access to so many opportunities to create unique and diverse characters. To jump off being funneled into Eldritch Blast and the best invocations tied to that cantrip, I firmly believe that Hexblade has done more harm than good for the class because it's the best subclass by a country mile. Why take Pact of the Chain, Tome, or Talisman when Pact of the Blade and Hexblade are right there? Hexblade is so incredibly helpful and good that it makes a lot of the other subclasses look like jokes, except for maybe Genie Warlock with its limited wish ability and the ability to take wish. While I will always argue that the power of the subclasses doesn't really matter in terms of party composition as long as everyone is having fun, it sucks when a class has a correct option that outshines everything else. Only having to reasonably rely on your charisma stat for your melee attacks or otherwise is powerful. It also allows you access to better armor and weapons that allows you to not have to focus as much on your physical stats like dex or strength. While the Hexblade is, from what I've gathered, a fun subclass, more of its problems with how powerful it is show up with something I'll address later in the video in its own section. Now here are some of the rapid-fire smaller issues I have with the class. The expanded spell list for Warlocks is the only spell list in the entire game that doesn't just give you more spells. It simply expands the pool of spells that you can pick from when you can take another spell. It's garbage. I'm so glad that this was changed in the UA. Their lack of spell slots also bites. The most you get that aren't the Mystic Arcanum is 4. Most of the time you're playing, you'll have 2 or 3 that's capped at 5th level. Yes, you get them back on a short rest, but if you can hand wave a short rest, more often than not you can just hand wave a long one. Unless the rest of your party is short rest focused, there's very little point. It also feeds into the player problem of wanting to save and hoard spells for the right moment. It could lead to fights where the Warlock never uses their leveled spells because what if you need them later and you have no time to waste? It puts more strategic pressure on the player to make the right call. In a more casual game, this is less of an issue, but it can become a problem in more hardcore meat grindy ones that require good use of spell choice and timing. Okay, so originally I had a paragraph about how most of the invocations sucked and required a use of a spell slot to use the spell that you got from the invocation, and when I went to double check as I was editing, I realized this wasn't the case. Most of the spell-based invocations don't require a spell slot to cast. Only the cool ones do, or at least the ones that I like and I feel like a lot of the community would find particularly useful. And even worse yet, some of these have absolutely bonkers level requirements that don't make any sense at all. The Warlock invocations are a mess that could be way more simplified. Not in what they do, but their requirements. Some of these are tied to specific pack boons. Those are fine for the most part, with a few that have me scratching my head. But then we have a couple that require specific amount of Warlock levels. Okay, makes sense. WotC wants to make sure that you invest in the class to minimize multiclassing. That's fine. But then most of them just have a level requirement overall, which confuses me. I could take 3 levels of Warlock, the rest in Fighter, and be a fighter that can cast Arcane Eye at will forever, despite the fact that I'd only have a little bit of magic to my name. It's a weird cop-out in a way that encourages multiclassing and not having to deal with most of the other mechanics tied to the class. I'm not crazy, right? This is crazy go nuts. Not to mention, some of these level requirements to cast certain spells at will forever is a bizarre combination of both level and spell choice. Let me go down some examples because they have me so incredibly confused. Mask of Many Faces lets you cast Disguise Self at will forever with no level requirement, but you have to wait until level 15 to be able to cast Alter Self, a second level spell, at will forever. Yes, it is technically a better spell than Disguise Self, but that's 15th level. When you can cast 8th level spells, you can cast Arcane Eye at will forever if you also wait till level 15. What's the point in making someone wait so long? With Arcane Eye, I get it because it's a 4th level at will, but Alter Self? What? You have to wait until 9th level to be able to cast Levitate on only yourself forever. Same with Jump, a 1st level spell. If this was to emphasize how the patron powers are really only for you and can't be applied to other people, sure, I guess if that was the idea, but then that hampers the usefulness of the class being able to be a team player. But then I'd ask why such a steep requirement to be able to take it. Some makes sense as that's when you get access to the spell to begin with, but they require a slot instead of casting it for free once per day. There are only 4 invocations that specifically require Warlock levels. 2 for Pact of the Tome, 1 for Pact of Talisman, and 1 normal one. I can maybe give the ones tied to specific pack boons and Warlock levels a pass for having both of those, but what makes Animate Dead so special that it requires specifically Warlock levels? Yeah, it's without using a spell slot once per long rest, but it's such a weird one out of the lineup that it demands 5 levels of investment into. It's weird, and trying to parse out why is difficult. And I know WotC is just straight up lying to us. It says in the section that the level requirements refer to the level in the class when that's not true. Then why make the distinction to begin with? Oh my god. If anyone has any semblance of an idea, let me know. While I do want to be fair here and say that there is some investment built in with how few invocations you have to start with, and by 20 you have 8, so your options are limited for how many you can have if you decide to multiclass. But then I'd also argue that the requirements are still pretty bonkers for not that much of a payoff when you have so few you can actually have to begin with. The UI did fix this, and allows for the class to have more invocations, which definitely helps with this issue. The multi-class rant. So I really don't like multiclassing, and unfortunately, Warlock is the poster child for my problems with the concept being in 5e. While other classes have their dips, nothing truly encompasses my dislike for multiclassing other than the Hexaden. While this isn't necessarily the class's fault, Warlock is the unfortunate bystander. I am a narrative-first player. I like combat to mix up what the party is doing and to either be annoying or with crowd control, or do big damage numbers depending on who I'm playing, but I mostly lean towards role-playing. It's my favorite part. I typically don't multiclass. I have maybe 2 characters that have it in their build, but those are strictly for narrative reasons, and it could easily be homebrewed into something else to let me have what I wanted from those dips to begin with DM permission. What multiclassing does is focus mostly on the gameplay aspect of this role-playing game. It makes it more of a power game meant to break the game over your knee. While there are people out there that also multiclass for narrative reasons, and sometimes will do it regardless of how viable the build is, even Wizards of the Coast is trying to curb how easy it is by pushing back the progression to make the dip more costly. I've seen builds that have like 5 or 6 different classes in them from 1 to 20, a splash of ranger, a splash of fighter, some rogue, a level of sorcerer for some reason, and unless you're playing in a game that requires you to game the system because it's a meat grinder with no role-playing, how do you justify that character? It's not impossible, but if someone came to me with their planned build and it looked like that, I'd ask them what narrative justification there is for something like that, because it's pretty slim to none most of the time. The only character I've seen that pulls this off is Puffin Force Absurd, that multi-classes with every class because he's a joke. I want to be clear that it's cool to feel powerful, or just be the best at doing one particular thing in D&D, but when it starts to feel exploitative of the systems is that I have an issue. It comes off as selfish unless everyone at the table is doing the same thing, or if everyone is cool with it. Unfortunately, Warlock doesn't also pigeonhole you mechanically, they also kind of pigeonhole you narratively. So narratively, while you can do whatever you want with whatever class you want, Warlock, I'd argue, is the most pigeonholed. While Celestial Warlock exists, every other Warlock subclass has a much easier narrative lean towards being a malevolent patron. If that's something you wish to explore, by all means, I'm not here to yuck yums. However, for me, this is irritating that the class leans so heavily in this direction. All of the classes have stereotypes, sure, but Warlock feels the grossest one to me. What wiggle room is there? It's also the only class, despite having no mechanics for it in-game, it's the first for DMs to be like, you're not following your patron's order, your class abilities are gone. Which, there's oodles of other ways to put pressure on a PC, and 2, it's a crappy thing to do to a player without consent first. Especially for long periods of time. But Critical Role, you may be saying. Travis and Matt have a tight and close relationship built on trust. Travis is a player who rolls with the consequences of his actions always and never complains. That is not every dynamic. And Matt's only one DM. I'm not going to agree with all of the things he does. He's just one of the most well-known. This isn't to knock his skill, only that he is one DM in a sea of many. What's the end result for narratives like this anyway? Losing your abilities forever when it's resolved, or multiclassing the problem away? I already went over why I don't like multiclassing. If you have to dip into another class to solve your narrative to the class you wanted to play, then what's the point? You could swap subclasses, but people usually like the subclasses they picked to begin with. Warlock has the potential to do a lot of interesting things with the relationship between Patron and Warlock. Ultimately, they aren't as powerful as full casters, so giving up your soul or some other bargain doesn't make much sense unless the PC was dumb. But if you take the Faustian bargain out of the equation, you can turn the class on its head and create a unique relationship different from a cleric or paladin. Neutral to benevolent of the sliding scale is not very often seen, but it provides some of the greatest potential for storytelling. There's so much creativity that could be squeezed out. For example, I have a few warlocks, all different. Ishan, a Yuan-Ti fiend warlock, was a tactician in the army he served. His general saw his potential to do good in the world and gave him warlock powers because he was secretly a gold dragon the whole time. Mira is a human Raven Queen warlock. She has the curse of prophecy, so she has a third eye, and seeing the future is very painful for her. She used to be a Great Old One warlock before the Raven Queen saved her, and that's before the story starts. And then Sebastian, Water Ganassi genie warlock, and his mom is his patron, a helicopter parent who just wants her little boy to do well for himself and be safe. I don't bring up these examples to say I'm better than everyone else, just to show that there are so many different types of stories you can tell with Warlock as a class. I don't want to end this on a negative note, because like I've said over and over, the UI for Warlock that got revised fixed so many of my issues with how Warlock was initially. It's so much more appealing to me now. I'll still need to find the right campaign to pull out the right character in my backlog, but Warlock is going to be in a good place. Assuming WotC doesn't change anything again. I hope I could provide a different perspective on the class. Until next time.